Just want to say hello to everybody and welcome to the 5th Home I Love Claims webinar in the series Home Claims and helping each other through the challenge. Today, half in connection to a building conference which is due in July, which is chief sponsor of which of course is Geobar, we're going to be looking at building claim suppliers surviving and being ready for the restart. And that's a subject that has really been commented on a lot, and we have covered a couple of times before. So I'm going to look at it a little bit more today. It is a recurring and key theme, actually. So today we're going to continue to look at the capacity. What capacity do we have now? What capacity might we have in restart to be able to fulfill building claims? What might be the competitive pressures that we would face from other sectors within the construction industry? Then we're going to take a look at priorities in terms of the claims that were there, the claims that are still there, the claims that haven't started, and the claims that have yet to come. And then looking again at things like cash flow to make sure that when the financial challenges that exist now and will exist in cash flow immediately in restart, how we can best address them. And you know, these are the issues that in my day job as a management consultant, I'm coming up with insurers asking these questions and suppliers asking them all the time. So everybody seems to be engaged in it, and it's how we can help each other achieve a restart, however and whenever that occurs. So today, and they'll introduce themselves a little bit more in the first question, I've got Nick Hill from Aviva, Chris Carlton from Sedgwick Repair Solutions, and Sean Kelly from Hawthorne Estates. Anybody who was in the first of our 5 webinars will remember Sean isolated and recovering from what he thinks might have been the virus, and you'll see a slimmer and much more healthy looking Sean today. So good to have you back in one piece, Sean.
Thank you, Alan.
At the bottom of the screen, you can click on, you can ask, there's questions and answers and chats. Please get involved. We get a chance to ask some of the questions, and I'm sure we can make that through. Anything else you want to contact me about, any questions you've got about it, any suggestions before or after, then please just email me at alan@iloveclaims.com. So let's get down to asking the questions then. We're now, Turndown arrived a little bit earlier than lockdown, but we're now going into the 5th week of lockdown shortly. So where are we in capacity? Let's start, I guess, with you, Sean. What capacity have you got, and any of the other businesses you're in contact with? What capacity do they have to fulfill any claims at the moment?
Well, currently for us, we run around about 20% of the business, that's all, due to the furlough restrictions. At the moment, we've been proactively working on open cases, vacant properties, and the vulnerable policyholders. We still function with 2 of our contracts managers who previously, are now directors, but previously joined us. So we're working through work with that. We have specialist subcontractors that we can still bring in, and this is to help us with cash flow, which, albeit very small, is very critical. I think moving to the future, I think this is a real difficult one for all the contractors on the networks. I think the lockdown won't just simply close in 2 weeks, and that has the effect of what happens with furlough. We can't simply bring back in 40 staff 2 weeks on Monday. We can't get materials. Some of the suppliers we coerced into providing materials on pallets that we would collect, they've now run out of, say, plasterboard, because the plasterboard industry closed and we can't buy it anymore. So even when the transition from release back to work, we won't be able to be fully operational. We'll still be at 20%. Policyholders who are on 12-week lockdown with, say, heart conditions or vulnerable, they won't let us back on site anyway. And also, we've seen a change in attitude this week and the end of last week from policyholders, demanding to be first when things are released. So I think the likes for Chris and Nick, you might run into complaints week 1 for delays.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Chris, from your angle, you're running a large repair solution. Where do you think your capacity is currently?
I think with the work that we have in the cabinet, we have a good view on where it is and what needs to be done with it. Volumes coming in, as we're all finding, are reduced, but there's potential for that to ramp up significantly once we understand what's happening with lockdown and where it may end up. And what the release might be, as Sean says, it's not going to be a flick of a switch and everything's back to normal. We need to wait for guidance from government and other areas as to what's the best way and the best plan in order to return to work. I think customer communication and clear communication is going to be key to this. So understanding the customer, what their situation is, as Sean has just said, we may have customers that are still in a 12-week isolation period, and so we're unable to get back, and yet other customers whose expectations are we'll be there on the Monday after lockdown is eased or lifted. And so we need to take that into account and consideration. I think from a what do we do in the future, we're all used to in this industry of dealing with surge and spikes in work, and we're good at responding. We've actually got an opportunity here because we can see down the road a little bit as to what work we have and what's coming in and plan and organise. And that's where our skills can hopefully come to the forefront from contractors, networks and insurers working well together to have a plan in place for how we return. And that'll come down to organising materials where we can. And, you know, there's going to be challenges around that, and we need to have a good, solid plan in place in order to respond and deliver to customers and clients.
Thanks, Chris. Nick, have you ever run their own contractor network as well as developing it through other third parties involving claims with that? Where do you see your current capacity?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Similar story, really. Similar story to Chris. So we've scaled back our current activity to kind of the urgent and critical work that can kind of stabilise either the existing claims we've got or some of the new claims coming in to make sure that, you know, kind of our customers are in a kind of safe and secure position, you know, where we can't complete all of the repair work. So I think in terms of the capacity for that, we've been really pleased with the response and the way a lot of the suppliers have managed their businesses. Sean was saying there to keep elements of it open and running so that we can respond to those critical demands. I think that's worked well, and we haven't seen really too many issues at all come out where we haven't been able to meet the emergency needs. So capacity for kind of what we want and need to be doing at the minute is good. But then, as Chris said, there is about having that plan for kind of how we come out of this. And I agree. I don't think it's going to be a big bang, right? Everything's back up and running and off we go. I suspect it'll be quite staggered across different industries and different parts of the industries. And I think we're mindful that you know, the government's clarified some of its advice, the advice that we can work in people's home and you know, emergency repairs and kind of just general building repairs and post-insurance claims is okay under the right protections, but we need to do our bit to make sure that works with the suppliers and how their businesses are running and the cash flow and the materials and safeguarding employees and the customers. So I think it is careful planning, as Chris alluded to, and I think the communication with the customers is really key as well as to how we best use that capacity. You know, some customers will have different appetites for work they want underway or work they'd rather kind of hold off. We've got a lot of customers still off the back of the flood claims in alternative accommodation, so we're focusing on what, you know, what's the best fit for some people in that situation. So it's quite a melting pot of so it's not just the kind of capacity available to us, but it's kind of what the kind of parameters we're going to have to work in with that capacity, and it does make it a detailed kind of planning exercise, and communication between all of the various stakeholders is at the heart of that.
Okay. Thanks. Chris, just come back to you for a minute. We've talked about being ready to go out. Listening to some of the challenges at contractor level that Sean issued and I think Steve issued the previous week. What can we do to make sure that contractors are still in business, and even if they are able to scale up at the right pace to make sure that they can fulfill the obligations that you've got? Bearing in mind, so there's one other complication that isn't there, that most contractors in this industry have at least several customers. So how do we check that we're not double and treble counting capacity when we try to go back to work?
I think the key thing there is about the relationship that, for me, as a running the network, we have with all the contractors that are on there, and understanding and awareness around what other work they have. And it's about not being isolated to look at, this is just for us. There are other parties involved in this, and we want that contractor to be around in 6, 8, 12 weeks. Because the challenge we have is, if we don't work with contractors and clients to make sure that we can deal with the work in the cabinet and what's coming down the road, and we put restrictions on the contractor or limit what they can do, then that will impact on their availability in a short period of time down the road. So we need to understand what challenges they've got. You know, some contractors have furloughed a significant number of their staff. Others have furloughed a lower number because they can continue other areas of work that they're involved in. And a lot of it's around understanding the mix of work they've got. So like Nick said, we're still able to carry out emergency works, stabilisation, and even works in some void properties, as long as it's safe for the contractors to do that in line with the current PHE operating procedures. And it's about understanding what challenges that has with regards to length of claims as well, because we'll see delays in claims being repaired because we can't work in the same and normal manner as we did before. So we've got to understand the contractors and the needs that they have, as well as in conjunction with what's our plan for down the road. So, you know, we may have lower volumes coming in, but there's probably more anticipation about how quick they will start in the coming weeks. And it's the uncertainty around, is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 12 weeks down the road that we need to plan for.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Sean, how then do you plan for an unknown acceleration of restart, or can you only plan for a slow one?
I think, go back to what Chris said about the surge. I mean, before COVID-19, we were in the subsidence surge, and we had work programmed through to October of this year. So when things are lifted, you know, we've got a massive problem in trying to program all the work that's previously programmed in up to October, accepting new claims. Chris mentioned about working on void properties, empty properties. We've got some NFU work, but there's no communication from our suppliers. They just said, close all sites. And we're spending a lot of time going to them and saying, look, we've got an empty farm building which has collapsed with nobody in it, not even cattle. Why can't we work on that? And the communication to us is missing. So there's work we could go and do, but we're not allowed to because there's this blanket approach, close everything. So for us, you know, we're going to be in a surge, definitely.
Nick, how are you viewing the readiness for restart from all the field work that's going on within Aviva?
Yeah, and it really is a kind of day by day view, as you'll appreciate, with the evolving situation. And I think as Sean said there, the communication is vital, and having kind of a clear protocol on what we're willing to do and not do. So at the outset, as I said, we scaled it back to the kind of emergency and stabilisation work, and what we're looking now is with the unoccupied properties, the void properties, you know, absolutely, if we can safeguard the people working in those properties, and if the customers are happy for us to be working there, then absolutely we should look to progress those claims where we can. And likewise, I think as this moves further, there's going to be I guess different levels of lockdown being lifted. So if some of the social distancing and some of the sort of physical measures on how sort of closely people can work remain in place for quite a considerable period of time, then I think we need to think really carefully about how we can start to kind of tease out more and more of that work that we can get on with to protect people's homes and to start to kind of unlock the workflow back into the contractors. But I think that's where the communication is just going to be fundamental to that. I think if we're clear on the kind of protocols and what we want to work to, and clear with firms like Sean's on what we agree they can and can't do, and absolutely something like unoccupied properties is something that if we can put the right safeguards in place for the people working there, that there is an opportunity to start progressing some of that work, and then that may evolve as we get through this over the next weeks and months. So yeah, to answer the question in terms of how we manage capacity at the minute, it does evolve. We've obviously got to be mindful of the government's advice of what's right socially, of what's needed to look after, you know, our staff and the staff of the suppliers we use. But if you can navigate a path through that, then absolutely we'd want to be progressing things, you know, for the customers, and you know, if we can be clear about what that looks like, hopefully that can help some of the suppliers plan sort of their business accordingly.
Thanks, Nick. Sean, we had a couple of questions in from Oliver. One of the ones that looking at is if, and there was some idea that one of the builders merchants had got some supply of stuff, and the question centered around was, if we all got together and all of a sudden supply came through, could we try and stockpile? That sounds pretty difficult, I have to say, for me, given some of the competitive things that we might go into. Is that a realistic option, Sean?
Difficult. We placed 2 large orders, both sort of $2,500 orders, 5 weeks back when we could see what was going to come, and both orders were cancelled on us. We never got delivery. So in answer to Oliver's question, if we manage to get a supplier, I mean, there's B&Q have opened up. It's chaos. They're just letting anybody in. There doesn't seem to be any social distancing. We can go in and buy at a very high rate of cost. But if we stockpile it, we're back to the problem of, in 2-3 weeks' time, can we get to site?
And I guess I don't know, Chris, whether a network kind of a plan to try and secure easier supplies for its contractors. I mean, that sounds pretty difficult to me. It sounds very good in text, but in practicality, at the best of times, that's quite challenging. Is it a realistic option at the moment?
I think, as you say, Alan, in theory, it sounds workable. In practice, we have over 60 or so contractors that are all individual businesses, and trying to coordinate and plan and organise, you know, a stock delivery to everyone who all has different needs because they work on different repairs and different services is probably nigh on impossible, probably, to organise in a sensible fashion. I think what we can do is look at each contractor and what their needs are from the work that they have in and what's coming down the line. You know, we talked about communication with customers. There's going to be a challenge, I think, from customers as well with regards to who wants us back in the property or not. You know, from my point of view, I wouldn't mind if a contractor, if restrictions are changed and contractors can start working, then they'll come back and I'll have them in my home. But other customers might be a bit more wary and a bit more cautious about that approach and say, well, yes, I know there's work that needs to be done, but can you leave it for a month just while things settle down? And that's where the communication comes in. And there's activities we can undertake with the planning side of things as well. Most of our repairs have some element of customer choice around them, where we want customers to decide on kitchens, bathrooms, decorations, for example. Is the work that we can be doing now to understand what those needs are going to be in the future, to get a really good picture and a handle on what the supplies may be. And Sean makes a good point. You know, B&Q reopens, I think it's 144 stores, but the structure around it is probably not as clear as what we would have expected. Yeah. And, you know, it could end up with its supply and demand at the end of the day, and cost could increase significantly. And these are all factors that we need to take into account when planning how we do return, and how it's going to be a staggered approach that we're going to have to take, depending on the contractor's ability to ramp back up, as well as the industry's ability to progress work and manage expectations across it. You're on mute, Alan.
I accidentally muted myself, which might be quite good. Nick, without giving away any secrets we wouldn't want you to do, but what kind of plans have Aviva got in place to try and help us through with supplies? Because, you know, you've got a whole range of work for the whole field. You've got through lots of different supply routes and a few of the quite advanced ways that you try and deal with claims. So, you know, are you confident in the plans, or are they still very, very mobile at the moment?
Yeah, I think they're mobile. I think there's definitely an opportunity to sort of think differently about how we move around the kind of resources and the materials as well. And you know, we know there are material shortages and access to those materials is also restricted. So I think we need to do something different. You know, we're working with our kind of network of contractors, looking at what those options are, and that varies by region and by the firm. And as Chris said, it is very difficult logistically to come up with a kind of neat way of moving some of that forwards. You know, as I say, in a very different fashion to the way it's been done before. But we're looking at other options and trying to think about the best way that we can support that and get ourselves ready to help the customers as soon as we're kind of logistically more able in terms of the work state. So yeah, it's agile at the minute, but there's, you know, we do need to think kind of creatively about how we can get best place to move that forward. Oh, Alan, I think you're on mute again.
Yes. I'm very good with technology, honest. Sean, in terms of the wider sectors in the construction industry, what are the difficulties going to be? Is it going to be a greater demand for resource and trades when we return to work because everybody's desperate to get back on the job and move it forward? Or, and this is a very hard question, is the economic situation going to downturn so far that actually there's going to be less of a demand and it might be easier for us? We know it was tough before we went into lockdown.
Yeah.
Any idea what it's going to be like when we come out?
Well, I think with the start of the supply chains opening up, the likes of B&Q, Travis Perkins doing deliveries, local suppliers to us, we've managed to coerce to give us materials. I think once the large construction sites nationwide, you know, they're starting to plan to open up now, I think that will impact on us and the insurance industry. You know, the challenge will be sourcing materials for them also. You consider the amount of materials that may be imported from Europe and further afield, which now obviously aren't coming in with the restrictions. So I think the construction industry as a whole, of which the insurance company is only a small part, we'll all be vying for materials. We've run for many years an apprenticeship scheme also. And with furloughing our lads and only bringing them back in on a phased operation, you know, are the large companies going to come in and poach these guys? You know, we predominantly deal with insurance work. We do work over the last 3 years, 4 years in the private sector now to try and balance things, because working within the insurance field and the adjusters and direct for insurers, it's a difficult path to follow when there are alternatives out there now. And I'm sure a lot of the contractors possibly listening today have diversified, as have we, because of the difficulties we face within the insurance field. So I think in answer to your question, Alan, which was about, you know, competitive pressures at the start, I think there'll be a lot of pressures, including the financial element. So we'll talk about that later, but that is a major player for all the contractors out there at the moment.
Okay. Chris, do you, as running a network, do you have a view on how these competitive pressures from other parts of the sector might impact you?
Yeah, I think Sean's right in that we're starting to see major house builders opening up larger sites with restricted operating procedures in place. And whilst on the one hand, that will start manufacturers, we see that, you know, plasterboard companies, brick makers, etc., are starting to open up again as well and create a supply. The larger sites will put a demand on that. And as Sean said, you know, the construction industry is quite transient. So people in one industry will go to another industry quite quickly. And if that's where the work is, then contractors could feel some pressure from resource moving. And diversifications happened a lot in contractors. You know, they're not purely insurance repairers or new build specialists. They will do a mixture of it. And on the one hand, that helps. But in a time when we're talking about a potential surge down the line and resource being a challenge, we need to be able to counter that and be in a strong position of making sure contractors can respond. I think cost pressure is going to come on the back of it. You know, I think the expectation from everyone is that costs are going to go up. And especially in insurance repairs, we don't work on open sites. We work in restricted, close proximity sites to people. So additional PPE, hygiene, sanitisation measures are going to need to be taken. And again, that all folds back into the plan that we talked about earlier of understanding the work and what restrictions we may have on being able to complete it. But I think, you know, in short, yes, there will be a pressure on us from other areas of construction. But again, it's a moving feast. It changes every few days, never mind every week or 2 weeks. And I think as we understand more about how pressures might be eased from lockdown, we need to take that into account and be able to respond quickly and nimbly to be in a position to progress works where we're able to.
Right. Chris, right, from your angle, one, you know, contractors and its individual trades, contractors may have difficulty recruiting as much of that as well. Secondly, as an insurer, and I'm not asking you to answer on behalf of Aviva here, but does that mean that networks like Chris's and insurers like yours are going to have to be really look at some of the tighter rates they have and be more flexible with them as we go forward?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of ways where we need to be quite agile with those relationships moving forward. Yeah, we as the guys have said, we will face into some of those competitive pressures. You know, similarly, the majority of contractors we work with have focused on insurance repair work, and you know we've had good long-standing relationships with them. But we've got to be realistic to the situation we're walking back into. So that's where I think we're trying to stay really close to all of our supply network at the moment, have those good open conversations and sort of both take a long-term view of how we can best work through this. So in terms of how that plays out, in terms of, you know, where's that agility come from? What things do we need to do differently? Again, that will, as Chris said, that probably changes on a daily basis, but that will vary sort of by contractor. But at the minute, it's very much keeping that open dialogue so that we can have kind of sensible conversations about what are the best outcomes we can achieve over the next kind of weeks and months, and then kind of acting agile to that. But yeah, for sure, we've got to be realistic about the world we're going to be stepping back into.
Okay, thanks. I've got a couple of semi-related questions and then one I want to come. So if you bear with me, Sandy Fraser's asked in the resumption of work, it's similar to what we've been saying, contractors will almost certainly be starting from a lower working capital base. Can insurers and adjusting networks consider faster or forward payment schemes to support contractors and suppliers, as some house builders are doing? And can rates be adjusted to reflect increased cost of supply? And then somebody else has asked, do we expect costs to be driven up? PP items prove very difficult to obtain and allow safe working within the home. In relation to the furlough scheme, is it correct that the government can close the scheme at any time, so forth? And then also something I read in one of the construction papers this week, which suggested that unless something changes in the current rate, basically the construction industry will go bust about the middle of July. So, Sean, first of all, from your perspective, does that sort of scenario sound familiar? Sorry, I can't hear you, Sean. Can you hear me? Well, let's go to you, Chris. Does that
Yeah, but I read the same article, Alan, that you're referring to there in Construction News, I think it was, in that they predominantly focused on larger businesses, but they were saying there's a risk to SMEs that, you know, in the next 6 to 8 weeks, they could be under significant pressure. And I think that's true, but I think we've got to regard that alongside the great work that's been done over the last month with regards to cash flow into contractors to ensure that they're in as stable a position as possible. And that's why the furlough option's been taken by a number of contractors as well to safeguard their business and plan for the return of it, to make sure that we're able to deal with what's coming down the line. I think with any business, any industry, there is a risk as to what we can and can't do. And again, it comes down to good relationships, clear communication to make sure that people are doing the right thing and managing their workload as well as their business to make sure that they're in the best position down the line.
Okay. What's your view on that, Nick? There's certainly no issues going on, and I hear what Chris says, and I'm sure there's a lot of really good effort getting into it, but it just can't be cleared up that quickly normally. How are you viewing that at Aviva?
Yeah, the risks are very real. I think we've got that sort of relatively steady stream of the emergency and critical work, but that in no way meets the kind of volume of jobs and work that was flowing previously. And I think that's where, there's probably two bits that are key in this. One is there's an element where it's in our gift as to how we can best kind of safeguard work to continue. So we're into the unoccupied properties. There's probably, as we move out of this, we can think of those innovative ways of how we can. Chris mentioned working in confined spaces in homes. The majority of homes are occupied that need insurance repairs. So how can we better safeguard that work, and how can we get more confident with progressing as much of that as possible, and start to kind of feed that growth back into the kind of insurance repair pot that's currently stripped right back. And I think if we're really sensible and clear on that, and the second bit is the payment and the movement of cash, so making sure that we are paying promptly, we are understanding the needs of all the suppliers we work with as to how we can best support there, then I think there's an element where we do as much as we can to sort of start moving that forward, and then face into each kind of external challenge as that comes around.
Okay, so back to you, Chris, just then. We've lost Sean. I'm trying to get him back. I've had quite a few questions from contractors around us. I mean, there's first of all the PP protection issue. It's not easy to, as we all know, it's not easy to get that equipment, so how easy it's going to be in return, I don't know. But secondly, when we look at trying to get the debt, and I know you guys are trying really hard on this, it is tough. And to some extent, we have to keep going. But I'm hearing things like, if I was a contractor, should I be going straight? If I'm struggling to get anywhere with a loss adjust a particular claim from a third party, and I go straight to the insurer to get it resolved, then sometimes it can spoil the relationship I have with the third party in between. If we're reaching the desperate stage of cash flow for them, what other option do they have? And you're caught in the middle and running the network with this one.
Yeah, very much so, Alan. And there's been a huge focus on age debt and getting cash through to contractors, and we've seen significant progress. Partly because people are less travelling. So they're more available to speak to and to deal with things. We've seen, looking at some numbers this morning, over about £1.5 million cleared in the last week and a half, of debt. And that comes through good communication. What I'd say for the contractors is they are still doing some work, and there's work that is finished that needs completing and final accounts producing on them. Make sure they're put across in a clear way, make sure they're complete, and we can help progress and get those put through. The more hands we have touching something, there's always a delay to that. And, that's a continual challenge that we have in the position that we sit in, about making it as easy as possible to deal with a claim and to smooth that transition and that process inside of things. But, there is money available there, and we just need to work together to make sure it's clear what needs to be done and when, so that we can put that through. Because the more we can do now to stabilise contractors, the better response we'll have in the future as and when we're able to get back to normality, however that may look in the future.
I think a lot of work does need to be done, because I think it's now a matter of making sure there are sufficient contractors still in business. If you even look at it coldly, but of course these are all people's businesses that we're talking about that have to survive. One of the other issues, Nick, then, and I think you guys have been doing quite a bit of work on this, to be fair, is you might have a supplier and you might do absolutely everything that you can to make sure that you're getting every cash flow through to them, either directly or through any third parties. But if everybody else doesn't do the same thing, then of course that supplier might still not be available to your own business or have enough capacity when we do return to business as usual, if we ever do. Yeah. So how can insurers and networks collaborate sufficiently to make sure that everybody gets this done? or do we not really talk to each other enough that way?
It's a good question. And yes, certainly with the suppliers we work with directly, we've I believe got a good track record of paying promptly, and we'll carry on prioritising that, and also making sure that we're not the kind of difficult place that Chris and his colleagues get stuck between with the sort of suppliers we work with kind of indirectly through loss adjusters. So we need to focus on that side of it as well to make sure we're not holding anything up on that side. So absolutely, yeah, carry on doing everything we can because that's really important. In terms of how well do insurers kind of speak and collaborate on this stuff, the reality is there's probably more that could be done there, and to make sure that I'd encourage anyone who's working with an insurer to keep that communication channel open, have those open, honest conversations, so that we're aware of any of those situations that are threatening any individual firm or kind of groups of companies, so that we can react and do what we can to support that. And I'm sure the other insurers would say the same. So I think the more transparent we are in the communication and in replaying the situations that everyone's facing, then hopefully the more we can collaborate and find some solutions to that.
The good news is I can see Sean. I'm just trying to get on and see if I can.
Yay.
You're back, Sean. Welcome back.
I'm back on my phone. My internet on the laptop crashed, I'm afraid.
It's all right, don't worry. We were just asking the questions, which the guys gave some really good answers to, but the question really was the cash flow situation and the release of aged debt. And quite rightly, there's some great work going into it. Are you seeing results of that work, and how do you think we're really going to have to keep a focus on it to ensure that the cash flow comes through sufficiently for suppliers like yourself?
I mean, that's always been a bit of a bugbear for a lot of contractors. We've been quite unique in our approach, where we've always had a full-time qualified accountant working direct within the business. So I think, if you look at the statistics and the capacity we can run at, we've got Laura and Jude manning the office every day. And we have 2 full-time members of the accountant team just processing aged debt. So 50% of the office staff are doing nothing but chasing old debt. We work privately also for commercial residential blocks in Liverpool and Manchester, and we submit an invoice. 28 days later, that's paid. There's no million loops. There's no secrets. It's very simple. So I think for us, the fact that we have to put so much effort in to receive payment for work completed, and obviously to a good standard, where should we align ourselves in the future? Because I assume, Nick would confirm with small claims, they're having to be cash settled at the moment. Is that going to continue? That would have a big knock-on effect on cash flow for an awful lot of contractors. And, we maybe need to diversify more. Majority of our work is insured, and we'd like to stay there, but only if it's viable and profitable. So I think the key thing for us is, as Chris was saying about communication, it's not just on the claims, it's once the claim's finished, how soon can the processes be completed to ensure payment to contractors?
Chris, just as a follow-up to that, I know that when you're running an organisation like yours, you really go for cash flow quickly. You want all your suppliers to be paid quickly, but it's not always within your process to speed that. Are you worried about the danger that when you come back to the realities of claims, that contractors are going to find it hard? Because if nothing else, you've got to wonder that the banks might be, because I'm presuming many of them have to work with banks, are going to be saying, why are you building that debt over there when you can be getting speed of payment by concentrating in that industry over there? How big a fight is that for you who sort of caught in the middle trying to please everybody, really?
I think it's a constant situation that we and the contractors on our network find ourselves in. I'm actually quite hopeful that actually coming out of this, with the conversations we're having on these webinars and with clients and customers, etc., and contractors, that actually we will see some different focus and a different view going forwards, because people, the pressures that contractors feel are being felt by lots of different parties and organisations. And I think, you know, we've got to look at, the country isn't going to feel the same even when we are out of lockdown, because it might be a phased return, or there might be different scenarios we have to adapt to. And I think the industry, insurance industry, repairs, construction, will also need to adapt and change and look at what can we do differently. And we do that already with clients and our contractor network, to look at how can we improve and make it easier for everybody. Construction's not straightforward. We know that. We're in the middle of it, and, you know, building repairs, we all like to think it's very straightforward, but there are challenges and complications that come up during the course of the works, and that needs to be communicated clearly and dealt with, and people made aware, so that there's no surprises. There's nothing that's going to cause shock or surprise at the end of it, which is normally where we find that things get delayed and people don't process something because they need additional information. And that comes back to do it right first time, every time, which is the aim of every contractor that I work with and that they want to do. And we want that to follow right through to clients and customers as well, to make sure that it's as seamless a process as possible.
Nick, you work for an insurer which I know is dead keen on paying quickly, and certainly with the direct relationships you have an excellent record and reputation from that. I know that from one consultancy business. So how can insurers help make sure that the more complicated issues, but like that Chris just alluded to there, how can insurers help try and ensure that the suppliers that are involved in that process backup can move more quickly to, because this is about looking to make sure that the contractors can prioritise insurance work as opposed to other work. When things like banks at the moment, if they've got a big debt, banks are going to say, well, I'm not going to fund you against that debt, but I'll fund you against another debt. So how can you help through things that you're perhaps not as directly in control with as with other areas?
Yeah, and I don't want to put too many words into the mouths of other insurers, but I can see one or two in the comments as well who would share this view that, you know, I think all insurers will be really mindful of the pressures at the minute around cash flow, and be wanting to support that and do what they can. But you know, I'm sure every insurer has sort of different processes for you know, how to sort of validate claims and make the payments and move that through the ordinary course of business. And I'm sure they're all as we are looking to see how can we refine that, whether on an interim or short-term basis, or to improve things longer term, so that there's probably a number of options. But I think, you know, the key thing that's going to drive that is the awareness of what those pressures are from businesses across the supply chain to insurers. So real transparency of what those pressures are and what's best going to support, and that might vary by different types of suppliers and by individual suppliers themselves. So I think that, again, that transparency, that good communication is really going to be the driving force at the minute, because I'm sure that all insurers are in a similar position to us, where they recognise the problem, recognise the threat that can pose, and will be wanting to do what they can to support that. But I think yeah, just having those open conversations and you know, making really clear what it is for any individual situation that will help, will be the driving force to try and see some of those changes play through.
Thanks, Nick. We're coming towards the end. I'd like to thank all three of you, because that's a very honest-based discussion. And as we move forward over the coming weeks, moving towards our building conference, etc., we're going to keep this readiness of the supply chain when we get back to work at the fore. So that'll, you know, it'll be on capacity, it'll be on building supplies, it'll be on cash flow, to make sure to let everybody help each other get there. Because I don't think there's one particular part of the sector anywhere who can do this on their own, and I think that's what you've just alluded to, Nick. So I'm Chris. So thank you very much for that. We go back to Thursday to 3 o'clock next week, when we will continue to look at building claims, but we're also going to look at it from what could be the possible impact of virtual validation, whether that's done by the policyholder or by a third party, to to ease the pressure or to allow the fulfillment process to be simpler, which may result in a total simpler process. Really looking forward to that one. We have moved it today for different reasons than normal. If anybody thinks there is preferences to the times we hold these, please let me know. We'd have to go with quite a large sample to do that. As I've said before, we are only really here to help the industry facilitate its way to any day, but particularly to the current times that we've got. So please let me know, Alan at iloveclaims.com, if anything you think is worth raising. We will keep this going. We've had a very big audience again today, so there's obviously key interest. Thank you very much to Nick, to Chris and to Sean for your participation. It does really help. There are no easy answers. So I look forward to speaking with you all again next week. In the meantime, please follow all the guidelines. Let's make sure we're all here and ready for the takeoff. Have a good weekend and please stay safe. And thank you very, very much to everybody for listening. Bye.